Okay guys, this is Unit 9, Segment 2. It's going to cover most of Chapter 4, but it's called Ecosystems and Communities. We're going to look at the role of climate, what shapes an ecosystem. If you guys remember, ecosystem is including both life and non-life, abiotic and biotic. And then we're also going to take a peek at biomes, areas that have similar climates. So the difference between weather and climate is something that you should know, and it has to do with time. So climate is long-term averages of temperature, so year after year conditions of temperature and precipitation in an area. So if you were to travel and be delivered by plane to anywhere on the planet, you would encounter a particular climate, so an average temperature and precip for that area, and so you'd want to make sure you pack accordingly, right? This climate is caused by the trapping of heat, what's going on with the heat in our Earth system. So it can be driven by latitude, are you close to the equator or are you close to the poles? Winds, what direction are the winds coming from? Poles or equator? Ocean currents, same thing, it transports heat. The shape and the elevation of the land masses also will play a role. Are you at the top of a mountain where it's cold, or are you in the valley where it's warmer? So climate. Weather is going to be short term. We're not going to be looking at averages so much. We're going to be looking at specific data points, day-to-day conditions of the Earth's atmosphere at a particular time in a particular place. So the differences in latitude, near the equator versus mid-latitude versus polar regions up north, really focuses in on three main climate zones. It drives three main climate zones. So at the poles we have our polar conditions. We have temperate conditions in the mid-latitude, like where we are in Michigan, and then tropical down by the equator. And that comes with all kinds of environmental abiotic factors. Each of those do. But what shapes an ecosystem? Life and non-life do. So ecosystems are influenced by a combination of both physical, abiotic, and biological, which is biotic, factors. So biotic is the term for living. This is the entire living cast of characters with which an organism might interact with. So you can see in this image, these lions are interacting with, what is that thing? I'm not sure. But we've got a predator and a prey scenario that is, both of those parties involved are going to be part of the biotic factors of an ecosystem. But the abiotic is going to include things that are not living. And so climate, temperature, precipitation, how much was the average rain, humidity in percentage or soil, what's the acidity of the soil, what's the pH, how much water is available, all of those things. The air you breathe, oxygen you're breathing in, sunlight availability. I mean, all those things are going to be abiotic factors that drive an ecosystem or interact with it, the organisms in it. Two more words to compare. So habitat versus niche. Sometimes you hear niche pronounced that way. That was what my professor, the way that my Australian professor pronounced it, but otherwise you might hear it niche. Your book describes it as niche. But anyways, together, living biotic and non-living abiotic factors determine the survival and the growth of an organism and the productivity of the ecosystem in which the organism lives. How is the energy moving through it? So a habitat is defined as the area where an organism lives. This is going to include other life that's there and other non-life factors that are there. If an organism habitat is its address, then its niche is its occupation, its job. So niche is the full range of physical and biological conditions in which an organism lives and the way in which the organism uses those conditions in which it lives. So not only where it lives, but how it lives and what it needs to actually survive. That's niche. So niche is a tiny little word with a big definition and big examples included. There are no two species that share the same niche in the same habitat. Okay, one will eventually outcompete the other. They will completely wipe them out of the area. They'll migrate out, whatever, but they're not going to share every single aspect being the same. They can share the same habitat, but they're not going to share the same niche. What does a niche include? It does include its place in the food chain. Is it an autotroph? Is it a heterotroph? Is it a first consumer? Second consumer? Is it, what kind of consumer is it? Herbivore, carnivore, whatever. All of those words are going to be part of the niche. the environment that it needs to survive, like the specific temperature range it requires, what are its reproductive needs, what is its job in the environment, what type of food does it eat, and how does it obtain its food. That's all part of the niche. So we're now going to get into community interactions. Community, remember, is an organization level that includes all the populations in an area. So you will have, when we talk about community interactions, we're talking about populations interacting with each other. So one species may compete with another, and that's competition. That occurs when organisms of the same or different species attempt to use an ecological resource in the same place at the same time. They're going to compete for it. And then we have predation, which is an interaction where one species is going to capture and feed on another species. Another last community interaction is called symbiosis. This is the relationship in which two species live close together. There's a close relationship there. So there's some examples here. We have these fish that will actually clean the mouths of these larger fish. These larger fish don't eat them because they actually benefit from getting cleaned. So mutualism is where both species benefit. And it's a plus plus. You can write that. So this fish is getting a food source, while this larger fish is getting clean. No more infections for him. Commensalism is another form. It's when one member species is benefiting and the other one's neither harmed nor helped. And barnacles on a whale fin is an example of that. The barnacles are obtaining a place to live. They're getting benefit from lots of water moving over the surface of it. They're filter feeders. But the whale is not harmed. Nor is the whale helped from that relationship. So that's commensalism. Parasitism is when one species lives inside or on another organism and it harms it. So one is benefiting and one is being harmed. Here is a larva parasite that is getting nutrients from this caterpillar, and the caterpillar obviously is being harmed because its nutrients are being stolen from it. The next segment is, it's not segment, it's part of the segment, but the next section in this is succession. All right, so ecosystems are constantly changing in response to natural and human disturbances. Older inhabitants gradually die out and new organisms move in, and it leads to an overall change in the community. Remember, community is all the populations in the area. So ecological succession is a series of predictable changes that occurs in a community over time. Have you ever looked out at an area and watched it change over time, like going from open and whatever, open and free, to eventually being covered with shrubs and then trees move in? It takes a long time, so it's not something that you would just see in a year, certainly, or even 2 years, or even 10. It's going to take a lot longer. But sometimes you can witness those things over long periods of time. So you have annual plants that will over time be replaced with perennial plants. Those are the ones that come back every year. And then to be replaced by shrubs, to be replaced by softwood trees like pines, to ultimately be replaced by hardwood trees. Hardwood trees are typical of a climax community. There's two types of succession you guys need to know: primary succession and secondary succession. Primary, you guys, there's no soil that exists in the area. You're starting with square one. So this happens with volcanic eruptions, bare rock where glaciers melt. If you were to let a parking lot just go, if you were to let a parking lot not maintain it and just kind of let it go, that would be a primary succession. So soil has to actually get made by the process of weathering and all of that. So that takes a lot longer. Secondary succession, though, it happens a little faster. This is where you still have soil. The change occurs, but you still have soil. That wasn't removed. But everything else was removed. So like clear-cutting land to plant crops, by humans, or a fire blowing through, the soil's still there, but the plants are not, and you're starting all over from that end. So the first to populate an area after change has occurred is called a pioneer species, and the most popular one is lichen. You see that growing on rocks and things like that will help break down those rocks and actually form soil. So we see these in primary succession, pioneer species. A climax community is considered a mature, stable community. It's not supposed to go through further succession. However, we do not see that to be the case. We do see change always happening, but a stronger, more resilient community is now what we consider a climax community, and that is with the hardwoods. So here is an example of pioneer species lichen coming in. You can see it growing on that rock. And then a nice climax community of hardwoods is existing here. These are old forests, old forests. And then that same image, and I put it on your notes as well, showing the transition. Annual plants replaced by perennial plants, which are replaced by shrubs, and then softwood trees, and then ultimately hardwood trees. I think that's it. Yes, that's it, friends.